Hi, hey, hello. I'm so mad about this that I went and tiger sharked myself. First thing off the top, Neil Gaiman is a horrendous, deplorable human being, and I'm going to be spending this entire runtime eviscerating him. Which begs the question, why am I making this video? Thing is, I've heard a lot of criticism of Gaiman since his crimes, and most people say that his art is actually really good. So that got me thinking, is his art actually really good? Or is he a product of his time that doesn't deserve the but actually he's been afforded? Here are the little rules I've set up for my review, if you can call it that. I watched 3 of Gaiman's works that have been made into video. I was gonna read his work, but I made this kinder fast and I literally don't have the will to do it. The 3 victims are Coraline, Sandman, and American Gods. I have never seen Coraline or American Gods before. I watched Sandman before, but only the first season when it first came out like 12 years ago or whatever. Without further ado, we start with Coraline. I will acknowledge that Coraline is an entire generation's version of Nightmare Before Christmas, so I'm here to give everyone who loves this movie a pass. The person responsible for this movie is Henry Selick. He's the guy who adapted the novel for the film, so if you can't let this movie go, tell people that it's Henry Selick's movie, not Gaiman's. Anyway, I have to acknowledge that the stop motion and the visual effects are amazing, which should surprise no one. Coraline gets her intro by searching for water with a poison oak stick. Very intriguing. YB is perfectly unsettling on his first meeting. Poor kid has scoliosis or something. Coraline's parents are workaholic writers for a gardening magazine and pay little attention to her. So Coraline discovers this tiny door in the house's den, and it turns out to be a mirror dimension with her other parents, some sort of entities with buttons for eyes that wish to feed her good food and pay attention to her. Unlike her dismissive real parents, the mirror dimension turns out to be not so good, actually, and the other mother is this thing called the beldam. There's this old cat following Coraline around that gains the ability to talk inside of the mirror dimension. The cat is voiced by Keith David, which I found funny in an ironic way. Cough, cough, husk, cough. Ugee. Does anyone have a lozenge? Anyway, the beldam wants Coraline to sew buttons on her eyes, which is kinda gruesome. Freaked out, Coraline runs off and locks the door, but she finds out that her real parents have been taken by the beldam. Oh, and she gets locked into a mirror room with ghost children who ask her to find their eyes and free them. So, armed with the lens of truth, Coraline heads to the mirror dimension to do battle with the mother of others. Why, she kinder. Anyway, Coraline hears that other mother likes to play games and she challenges her to hide and seek. Coraline has to find her parents and all 3 children eyes to win. If she loses, she gets button-eyed. This sequence of the once lovely mirror dimension twisting and morphing against her is pretty damn cool. I will admit, Coraline manages to save her parents and the children because it's a kid's movie and her parents are nice. Turns out, all her parents needed to do was finish their writing assignment and they become quite good, parent-wise, writers. PSH. I came to realize pretty early on that, sure, this is a pretty fun and interesting story. Problem is, it's not exactly exceptional. It's a spooky-looking glass story that is helped immensely by the stop-motion movie. If this was a live-action movie, I doubt anyone would have even liked it. The story is completely formulaic. I've read more exciting Goosebumps stories than this. Unfortunately for me, this is the best story. Now I'm gonna talk about Sandman. Not the comics, the TV show on Netflix. So the theme of this is kinda complex. We're talking about these superior god beings called the Endless. The main one in the story is Dream, an endless god overseeing the realm of dreams. His name is Morpheus, and he looks like Slash from Guns N' Roses rubbed a balloon on his hair. Well, not in the show. In the show he looks like this guy. Does that sound like a cool premise? I thought so too. Anyway, episode 1 is about a cat. A purebred cat has relations with this stray and gives birth to kittens. Unfortunately for her, her owner is the worst human to ever exist, and he does something to the kittens to make them not exist anymore. I am not going into detail about that. If you know, you know. Anyway, she gets really pissed and prays to the god of night. which flings her into the dream realm. She is approached by a dead crow, who is straight up voiced by the horrid scumbag himself, Gaiman. Talk about a jump scare I was not ready for. She goes on this long quest. This quest she goes on is kinda similar to Orpheus in a way. She has to answer to a dragon and ignore the desperate screams of her dead children. It's all symbolic of the struggles of mankind. This is a cat I'm talking about, by the way. She arrives at Dream's domain. Dream is a cat in this scene. He's kind of a giant bucket, though, so it's different. The only reason I know it's supposed to be Dream is because I'm pretty good at picking out voices. The show doesn't exactly explain it. Anyway, Dream tells the cat that there is a reality where cats are giant and hunt humans. The only reason that the giant cat hunting reality was changed was because a group of 1,000 humans literally dreamed the reality to be changed to what we all know, and he tells this cat that she could change reality back to that one if she convinces 1,000 cats to have the same dream. Oh, I almost forgot to mention, this cat is telling this story at a midnight symposium framing device. So she's telling this mini-story within a story about a bunch of characters that have relevance only within this story. Anyway, she convinces one cat to have her dream. Only, I said cat way too much. Anyway, let's talk about a writer now. So this next story is about a wash-up writer with no ideas left, and his book deal is rapidly approaching, so he needs help. The writer visits an old writer named Erasmus Fry. What a name! Erasmus sells him a woman named Calliope, a muse from Greek mythology. Erasmus has had Calliope enslaved for decades to force her to give him ideas for his novels, but he's a washed-up old man whose books will not sell even with a muse. Why does that sound so familiar? So this new writer promises to set her free because he is such a good guy and... Oh, wait, no. His book deal is coming up soon and he needs help. Calliope tells him to ask her for help when he frees her. So he gets mad and does something to her and he gets the idea for his book. Calliope prays to her sisters for help and they rebuke her because she's imprisoned by the rules of the old ways or something. So Calliope prays to Orpheus, Dream, Sand Person. He, freshly relieved from his own captivity, elects to help her even though they have a history. So Dream visits the writer and tells him to release Calliope. The writer says he won't because he needs her for ideas. Dream promises that, if all the writer needs is ideas, he will help him out, in abundance. This story then becomes something out of a Twilight Zone episode. The writer gives a lecture and someone asks him how he comes up with ideas. He then rattles off so many ideas that he leaves the auditorium and starts writing the ideas on the wall with his own blood because he didn't have a pen. Way to break my immersion. I've never met a writer without a pen. All right. Now that I've talked about these little vignettes, I can finally get to the main man, Dream. So Dream arrives at his realm, after being held captive and discovers that it's in ruin. He needs to fetch his dream tools to do dream stuff and he has no power to summon the fates. So he visits his friends in the dream realm, Cain and Abel, and he takes the life force of their pet gargoyle, Gregory. Yes, that Cain and Abel. Someone didn't read the Bible, it would seem. Anyway, Dream kills Gregory with consent and summons the fates. The fates tell him that his sand is with a Constantine, his mask is in hell, and his gem is with some British dude. This sets up what he'll be doing over the course of the show, but I stopped watching at the first episode because I got what I needed. Sandman isn't really about Dream and his adventures. The stories surrounding him are what the narrative focuses on. The vignettes of the cat and the writer are what Gaiman wants you to focus on. Never mind the cool endless god stuff. Not important. A writer buying a muse. That's what I want to see. So here's a thing to keep in mind with this particular story. All of this stuff takes place in the DC universe. Yeah. Gaiman was a comic writer for DC Comics. Sure, the endless gods are an interesting concept that any writer would love to play with, but Gaiman is more interested in these little stories surrounding Dream where Dream pokes his head in as a cameo at some point. If he set out to make an anthology of stories involving the Morpheus character, I would have at least known what I was getting into. All right. Now we move on to American Gods. I have not watched the show and only have a limited understanding of its plot. Mostly because after watching the first 3 episodes, I had to look it up to figure out what the hell is actually going on. Okay, so the show begins with a bunch of Vikings stranded on America's shore without any wind. They pray to their god to give them some wind to mostly false ears until they cut their own eyes out and fight each other in war combat. They get their wind after that and go back home. The story proper begins with a guy named Shadow Moon. He is let out of prison early because of his dead wife. On his way back home, he meets this old dude who manipulates the flight lady where you buy your tickets. I forget the name of that position. He plays the sympathetic old man and scores himself a first-class ticket. Something goes wrong with Shadow's ticket and he gets bumped up to first class as well. Upon meeting the old man tells him that, since today is Wednesday, that day is named after him. Shadow falls asleep on the plane and is visited by a buffalo with flaming eyes to believe, whatever that means. The plane has to make an emergency landing, and Shadow is stranded basically in the middle of nowhere with the old man, who is mostly called Mr. Wednesday. Meanwhile, there's this side story that happens where a woman named Bilquis hooks up with this shy white dude and has sex with him until he worships her sexiness to death. Which is fair, I'd say. Anyway, Mr. Wednesday offers Shadow a job. Shadow Moon agrees to work for Mr. Wednesday if his coin toss is heads. Shadow reads the coin tosses tails, but Mr. Wednesday says it's heads. Shadow ends up being wrong about the coin toss and is now Mr. Wednesday's errand boy. But first he has a funeral. Shadow finds out during the funeral that his best friend and get-out-of-jail employer was in the car with his wife, and she died with his peener in her mouth. Oops. Oh, Mr. Wednesday has this Irish companion who calls himself a leprechaun. They get into a fight after the leprechaun provokes him. While wandering around in the dark, Shadow gets a spider tech visor thing that attaches to his face and sends him to the car dimension. A distorted tech billionaire-looking guy asks him what Mr. Wednesday's planning. Shadow Moon, same as me, has no idea what this dude is on about. The guy orders his men to kill Shadow, and they basically beat the crap out of him and start stringing him up with a noose. But they stop when they all get split in half and explode into meat chunks and blood by who knows what. Seriously, I have no idea why that happens. The next episode starts with a scene from a slave ship in the 1600s. Someone on board prays to the god Anansi, who appears and informs them that their destiny is that of several hundred years of slavery with no end in sight. Anansi frees them of their shackles, and they burn down the ship with them inside it since nobody on board knows how to swim. Boy, I really like this Anansi characterization. I hope he's in this episode anyway. Mr. Wednesday double Shadow's pay for him almost getting lynched and sends him shopping for gifts. While shopping for Mr. Wednesday, Shadow is invited to join Lucy Ricardo's side of the war, I guess. She tells him that she'll offer him much more money and power than Mr. Wednesday. In this universe, apparently Lucy Ricardo, the actress for I Love Lucy, is a god of some sort. Shadow thinks it's a hallucination or something and freaks out. While Mr. Wednesday and Shadow are off to their next location, there's the side bit where Bilquis scores with a bunch more people to get more powerful. Man, if that was my divine power, I'd be powerless. Shadow is brought to a Russian household in Chicago that houses 3 sisters of various ages and one brother named Chernobog. Mr. Wednesday and Shadow eat dinner after Chernobog stops getting furious at Votten's presence in his house. Mr. Wednesday asks Chernobog to join his war, and Chernobog only agrees if Shadow can beat him in checkers. Shadow loses and Chernobog gets to bash his brains in with a hammer. At the start of the 3rd episode, a woman dies in her kitchen and is brought to the scales of Anubis. Despite being in a Muslim household, her heart is weighed and found to be the same weight as a feather. Her guide chooses an afterlife door for her at her request, and she asks him if he should before her hairless sphinx cat shoves her through the door. I'm starting to wonder if every episode is gonna start with some unrelated god doing something in America. Anyway, Shadow wakes up to the sleeping sister looking through a telescope at the night sky. The sister tells him about the thing in the stars, some sort of monster that the 3 sisters are tasked with keeping trapped because if it were to be released it would end the world in an instant. The sister gives Shadow the moon's blessing and he challenges Chernobog to checkers one more time. Side story time.
An Arabic man meets a Jinn driving a cab and takes him home to sleep with him.
The Jinn, promising him that he doesn't grant wishes, steals the man's body and gets into the cab. Now Mr. Wednesday and Shadow Moon have to rob a bank. Mr. Wednesday does this by having Shadow Moon think about snow real hard. When it starts snowing, Mr. Wednesday sets up a bunch of fake signs around a bank that the ATM is broken and poses as a security guard handling the funds being processed on the side of the road. A cop shows up and calls a payphone number, where Shadow Moon verifies Mr. Wednesday's identity and they drive off with the money.
The leprechaun guy shows up in a diner after a string of bad luck and digs up Shadow's wife.
See, when they fought, the leprechaun gave Shadow his lucky coin, which Shadow places on top of his wife's grave. So when the leprechaun digs her up to find it, the coin has burned through the coffin, which is empty. Shadow Moon arrives at his hotel room after his heist to find his dead wife waiting for him. And that's the first 3 episodes.
It took me 3 hours to watch all of that, by the way.
Can you tell me what the story is about? This is Gaiman's magnum opus. For the record, all I know is that Mr. Wednesday is Odin and there are these new age gods. I will say that the beginning parts of each episode and those vignettes tucked in between were actually kinda interesting, which leads me to my conclusion about Gaiman's writing.
He's a short story writer who got lucky with opportunities to write longer stories.
Problem is, he likes to keep the secret of his longer stories for way too damn long, which makes the story drags too much.
He tried to have his cake and eat it too with Sandman, but Morpheus himself is much more interesting than the humans, which makes the story suffer.
He wants to write about magic and gods and fantasy, but he keeps those things a secret in his story. For fuck's sake, I watched 3 hours of American Gods and I have no earthly idea what Odin's building an army for or who the New Age gods even are. Look, if you're going to write a story, write a damn story.
Don't beat around the bush, don't keep the interesting stuff close to the vest, and don't shove a bunch of vignettes in your story that have nothing to do with anything. You have to add to the main story you're telling. FFS.